is going to replace it. I think Netanyahu, one way or another, is probably reaching his end. He's one of the great disasters of politics of the last 30 years. He's done what Trump actually said about him a few weeks ago, which is everybody hates you, Trump told Netanyahu, and everybody hates Israel. That's pretty accurate. Israel behaves despicably. It's the worst of the worst around the world. Netanyahu is a thug leading a thuggish regime that has multiple arrest warrants by the International Criminal Court, which of course the United States then sanctions the court rather than respecting the fact that Israel is led by genocidaires, people who commit genocide, with our complete complicity. Will Netanyahu finally fall? Yeah, probably. Will the replacement be any better? It doesn't look like it. I don't hear anything in Israeli politics that says, hey, we shouldn't commit genocide. Hey, there are 8 million Palestinian people. We should live together in peace with them. Hey, maybe it isn't the right idea to go assassinate the leader of Iran. No, I don't hear a word like that anywhere.
I think he's exactly right here. He nails it completely that this goes so far deeper than Netanyahu. It's a corrupt political system with its own uniparty of sorts, as we see in the United States with support for so many of these atrocities. But the Israeli left opponents of Netanyahu, like Yair Lapid and Yair Golan and Gadi Eisenkot, they are not going to be substantially different for the region. It is a perverted political conquest that's shared among the political elites in Israel. And people on the Israeli right, like Naftali Bennett, they share the desire not only for war against Iran, but also for war against Turkey. They've openly talked about it alongside Netanyahu and his minions within the current Israeli government. So yeah, this goes far deeper than Netanyahu. Whoever replaces him might be better just in a relative sense, but they're not going to have different policy opinions. And if the Israeli left wins in the election coming up in a few months, I believe the latest that can happen is late October. If Netanyahu doesn't just suspend the Constitution and rule like Zelensky for years after his, appointed term, that could always happen with this kind of military government. I think that there's a chance that he will be tried for fraud and corruption, which he would have gone down for prior to the election, but he won't get charged with genocidal war crimes as he should, because he's a bloodthirsty supervillain facilitated and funded by my criminal government.
Nor do I hear anything much in Washington either about, we have opposition in Washington to some of this, so I don't want to denigrate people who are speaking out. But basically, the war machine continues in the United States because, as has been true for decades, our politics are controlled by the military-industrial complex. The presidents come and go, but the underlying idea that we need to feed the war machine so that America can kick the ass of any country in the world and thereby enrich, and I should have emphasized this, the ultimate goal is the enrichment of Wall Street, the enrichment of big oil, the enrichment of Silicon Valley, the enrichment of our billionaire class. It's pretty straightforward and pretty basic. But the point is, it's so deep-seated that, we had
good news.
Jeanette Sheehan, the Democratic Party senator from New Hampshire. I saw a clip. I hope I'm not misquoting her, but she was complaining that Zelensky fired particular defense minister, Fedorov. First of all, what is an American senator doing intervening
US
in the
economy
choice of the
in
defense
danger.
minister? Well, it's obvious. Sheehan sits on the Armed Services Committee. She's deeply funded by the military-industrial complex. That's American corruption up the wazoo. And that's how this whole system works. It's just too big a business, and Wall Street depends on these prerogatives. Big oil depends on these prerogatives. The military industry itself depends on these prerogatives. Silicon Valley and its financial bubble that it is living on.
Yeah, that's exactly how our political system works. It goes beyond Ukraine. It goes to every war theater because these politicians in power, their prerogative is not to their so-called constituents because their real constituents are on the board of J.P. Morgan and Lockheed Martin. They are creatures of supporting these wars and paying much more attention to supposed foreign threats for the purposes of propaganda and selling those wars than they are to their own communities. That's the entire political class, with a few exceptions I can maybe name on half of one hand, like Thomas Massey, end of list for the most part. But that's what goes on in Washington. And in Israel, if a different prime minister gets elected, you're still going to have those handouts to Israel, despite where the American people are on this, at least in the short term. In the long term, it might be different with the Washington political class not necessarily maybe being able in 20 years to resist the utter opposition to the Israel First doctrine. But right now, that funding is still going to go on regardless of it's Netanyahu or someone else. The wars are still going to go on whether it's Netanyahu or someone else. The war in Lebanon, the expansion of the West Bank settlements in Syria, the potential conquest of Gaza with new settlements set up there, or even Sinai. It's going to go on beyond Netanyahu unless the American politicians put an end to it. But so far, they've shown no propensity to do so.
Depends on the image of America being able to take on anybody and defeat anybody, and it's a complete hubristic delusion that we're living in right now, and it just gets more and more murderous and more dangerous because it's so mistaken and wrong-headed. And maybe I'll stop the rant by just saying none of these wars
is very important.
Has any deep reason. None of them involves American security in the least. None of them is impervious to solution through straightforward diplomacy. We don't want peace. Or Washington doesn't want peace. It wants dominance. That it can't have. But it could have peace. And the American people could have security, and we could actually save some trillions of dollars that we have squandered and continue to waste if we had just a modicum of understanding and transparency and accountability of our rogue government.
Yeah, man, that's a mic drop moment. That's exactly right. The wars that America wages, and often on behalf of other countries like Ukraine and Israel, are wars for empire. They're not wars for defense or security in any way, for the protection of the American people. Please, like, that's an absurd allegation to say, that somehow this is in America's defensive interests to funnel money to support genocides, wars of choice, proxy wars versus a giant nuclear power sitting on the most number of nuclear warheads in the entire world. None of it's for our benefit. The politicians will always try to sell you into that notion, sell you these foreign supposed threats as the next Hitler. They did it with Noriega. They did it with Saddam. They did it with Putin. They did it with the Ayatollahs. They'll always do it to avoid the simple fact that's in front of the eyes of every dissident, and that's that the real enemies are within our own gates. They wage war against the public, seize half of our wealth, set up a surveillance state that's known no bounds, that makes Edward Snowden's NSA revelations blush in comparison to what they're setting up now, laying the groundwork for a CBDC, all the billions of dollars in corporate welfare, all the wars of choice, the deep state cover-ups, the Epstein scandal. It's boundless. but it's proof your enemies are within your own gates. They're not overseas, and they don't depend, it doesn't depend on the elimination of them for your own liberty. It depends on the curtailment of your own overseers within your own gates.
Last question. Is the Greater Israel Project collapsing?
Yes, in the sense that the American Primacy Project is collapsing. Israel claims that it controls 8 million Palestinians, that it can kill them with impunity, that it can ethnically cleanse them. Right now, these absolute murderers in the West Bank in Israel are going in and they're burning down Palestinian homes. They're killing flocks of animals of Palestinian farmers. They're acting with complete impunity. And the United States is, Israel, that's great. What a democracy, and so forth. And Israel thinks that it can get away with operating the world's most fascistic government right now, the most murderous and blatantly illegal from the point of view of every international standard of any government. But it depends entirely on the United States. Entirely. Israel can't do this one day on its own. And Israel has had the stalwart support of the American public for decades, but it's lost that. Now the American public is sick of what Israel's doing. That's both Jewish public and non-Jewish public. It's across the board, especially the young people in America.
Yeah, that's totally true. Every poll suggests it, but the Israelis don't exactly have to, get their money from the United States based on acceptance by the public. They get it through the collusion with our political class, with our lobbies that support it, including AIPAC, which has a special carve-out to be a foreign lobby within our own borders that doesn't have to register under FARA. They have special intelligence sharing, special financial aid up to $4 billion a year before October 7th. But since then, they've gotten something like $40 billion while Americans languish. They don't have to appeal to the public. But at some point, just the opposition among the public might be so overbearing that American politicians aren't even willing to go out there on the debate stage and say, I support Israel to the teeth, out the gazoo. They won't do that necessarily, and maybe that will lose out in the end. But right now, I've seen nothing to suggest that that is coming to an end. Yeah, the public's turned away from it, but the regime, the warmongers in power, that's Trump, that's the Uniparty, that's Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer as well. Nothing has told me that they're willing to, wander off of that Hasbara line that requires continued funding, continued support for the wars, etc.
They're really disgusted with American support for this kind of murderous state. And the United States can't back Israel in this. That's proved by the complete failure and debacle of this war on Iran, which Trump will continue because he's too much of a
because he's weak to the pressures imposed upon him by the oligarchs who fund him.
That is the point. The oligarchs and this deep state. He's inconsequential. He loves to dominate, but he doesn't dominate anything. He goes along and he fights the wars of the geopolitical pivots that have been set in train decades ago, and he doesn't know how to stop any of this. But none of it's working. None of it can work. When does it end? Well, unfortunately, we just have to acknowledge this. In a world of nuclear weapons, it's just always possible that this imbecility ends up with something far more catastrophic and horrific than we can really fathom in our normal conversations and normal life. Any of this could escalate by accident, by mistake, by depravity to something completely catastrophic for humanity. That's the main reason why we should stop it all today. But even aside from the catastrophic possibilities, none of this works. Israel is not going to be, quote, greater Israel. Israel is not going to rule over millions of Palestinian people in some kind of genocidal state. This is coming to an end because the publics in the United States hate this. The European publics, where their leaders are complicit as well, they're disgusted. You look at what's happening in politics in Germany right now, the so-called far right, AfD, they're saying every day, we need to stop the war now. That's the far right. Where, you know, this is what is happening all through Europe. It's what's happening in American politics. The military-industrial complex calls the shots. The intelligence agencies continue the wars. The presidents and the prime ministers continue their theatrics. But the publics are completely disgusted with all of this. And so, to my mind, I don't know how and when and